Good morning, everyone. Oh, come on. It's not that early. Good morning, everyone. There we go. We are an informal gathering today talking about something that's very, very important. Want to welcome you to the Kiwanis Conference on Early Childhood. I am Bob Donaldson with Fox 59 News. Talk directly into the microphone. I'm going to be your MC today, and on behalf of all of our hosts, Kiwanis International and the United Way of Central Indiana, we want to thank you. We know that your time is busy. And we have some very important discussions on early childhood development. But before we begin, we want to encourage you to enjoy your lunch, which I know you are. Thank you to McAllister's. It's delicious. Try the iced tea. The restrooms are located here on the first level, right to the left as you head out of the room. And today's session is also going to be filmed and offered through a live webcast. You will be able to access them later at Kiwanis.org Children's Conference. Again, that's Kiwanis.org Children's Conference. And because of that, have a quick request. If you could put your cell phones on airplane mode or silence them, airplane mode, because that'll save our bandwidth and make it much easier for us to do our webcast. Okay. Want to get things started right now with a very special guest who has come a long way to talk with us. We want to welcome the 2013-2014 Kiwanis International President, Dr. Günter Gasser of Austria. He has some words of welcome. Günter, please make him welcome.
Thank you, Bob. It is exciting to see so many people coming together this afternoon. Kiwanis leaders from around the world, Indianapolis community leaders, educators, and others, and all coming together around the most important issue, early childhood development. As many of us in this room know, the best opportunities for children's futures begin even before birth. To develop into strong and healthy people with strong and healthy minds, children must have proper vaccinations and prenatal care. They must have the right nutrition. They must have emotional nurturing. They must be read to and have stimulating play environments. They must have access to quality early education. And this is why we are here today, to make sure today's children and tomorrow's children have all the things they need, not only to grow, but to thrive. Kiwanis International's motto is serving the children of the world. And please allow me also to mention my motto, we build bridges for children to the future. And one of our most compelling initiatives addresses this very issue. The initiative is called Young Children Priority 1. Starting in 1995, by Dr. Will Blechman, who is in our audience today. Oh, give him a big hand. That's it. Young Children Priority 1 brings Kiwanis members and clubs together in community service projects that support the best possible development of children from birth to age 5. And every day around the world, through Young Children Priority 1, clubs are hosting reading programs and book drives, supporting preschools, leading food drive efforts, and more, to ensure children have what they need to thrive. Kiwanis has nearly 600,000 adult and youth members in more than 8,000 clubs in 80 nations. So you can imagine that when Kiwanis partners with community leaders like you, today we can all make a tremendous difference in children's lives. And on behalf of Kiwanis International, I would like to offer our gratitude for this event. Thank you to United Way of Central Indiana for partnering with us on this event. Thank you to our speakers who have agreed to share their knowledge with us. And thank you to Kiwanians, Kevin Thomas and Tom DeJulio, and to Kiwanis staff for organizing the event. And most important, thank you all for joining with us today. We look forward to learning together about how we can help shape the best possible future for today's children, who are tomorrow's children. In this sense, let's start.
Please, another round of applause for Gunter Gasser. It is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Nancy Sugwanski. Dr. Sugwanski is an associate professor of pediatric medicine at the Fairbanks School of Public Health and the Department of Pediatrics at the IU School of Medicine. She is a leader in developing the first neurodevelopmental behavioral system of care for children in Indiana. Now, she is targeting the first 2,000 days of development. Her topic today is, in fact, the first 2,000 days, early diagnosis of brain development issues, and building a system of care within every child's community. Please join with me now to welcome Dr. Sugwanski. Doctor. All right, well, apparently Dr. Sugwanski has been held up, so we will move along with our program right now. We want to introduce also Robin Thurman. Robin Thurman is the Deputy Director of Ready Nation. Now, Ready Nation is a national nonprofit business organization supporting effective investments in children from birth to young adulthood. Now, Robin's role at Ready Nation is to facilitate opportunities for business executives to share views with key state and federal policymakers on quality workforce and a thriving U.S. economy. Now, she joins us now to talk about the economic impact of early childhood education. Please join me in welcoming Robin to our stage. Robin.
Well, since Nancy's not here, should I talk about brain development? Just kidding. Okay, let's change the slides. Are you ready? Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, almost good afternoon. I'm Robin Thurman. I'm Deputy Director of Ready Nation, and I'm very excited to be here today. I can't tell you how much I've learned this morning about Kiwanis and what you do out in the community, and that you're big emphasis is working with young children and helping children. So thanks to you. I just want to give you all a round of applause because I think that you do fantastic work out there. So I'm a businesswoman. I've spent most of my career working for big Fortune 100 companies like Northrop Grumman and Bechtel and BAE Systems, SRA International, to name a few. And most of my jobs entailed going out into the community and distributing corporate dollars. It was very fun, corporate philanthropy. And when I was at Northrop Grumman, we had a big program working with early childhood education, they were really the first company, it was TRW, then bought by Northrop, that did something as young as early childhood education. It was always, high school and university. And our CEO at the time from Cleveland decided that we really need to do something for early childhood. And so I got the first assignment back in the 90s to make a difference in communities where we did business. So I feel like I've come full circle. I've been at Ready Nation now for just 2 months. But I really believe in what the cause is, and I'm hoping that I can get more of you to join Ready Nation if you're from the business community in particular. So as Deputy Director of Ready Nation, I do focus on our business leader members from across the country to do 3 things. First of all, to ensure children and youth are prepared for success starting from birth. Secondly, to help create a productive workforce with 21st century skills. And lastly, to build communities that attract good workers and new businesses. So what is Ready Nation? Ready Nation is the preeminent business leader organization in the United States working to strengthen business and the economy through effective investments in children and youth. We actually now have over 1,100 members, and we want more of business leaders. And they come from corporations, companies, and business-related organizations of all sizes like local business roundtables and chambers of commerce. In 2013 and 14, through our advocacy in the U.S., our members contributed to winning more than $1 billion in new state funds and more than $2.3 billion in new federal funds for children. And if you look up here, you can see that we partner with the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives and the Center for Energy Workforce Development, among many others. So we build business champions for early childhood education around the world. I know this is an international meeting, so I wanted to focus on what we do around the world, and we're just starting in that arena. Our current locations are Uganda. The director of Ready Nation, at least for Uganda, in 2 weeks, which is why I'm here speaking with you today. Then we're going to be adding Peru and maybe the Netherlands, as well as we had a gentleman from Philippines this morning, so maybe we'll go there and help. So what do we do there? What do we do overseas? We support local leaders, just like here in the U.S., to recruit and mobilize local business champions for early childhood. We facilitate the sharing of information and experiences across the countries, and we elevate the issue of early childhood in relevant international organizations like Kiwanis that could help build business support in many countries. So the goal is to support early childhood programs and policies that help build each country's economy and workforce. And you'll be hearing from Dr. Nancy after me now about brain development, and you're going to hear a lot about the biological and physiological reasons for supporting early childhood education. But my focus today with you all is really to talk about the economics and the future workforce issues for supporting early childhood ed. So Ready Nation is really part of a larger umbrella organization called Council for a Strong America. We're 18 years old now. There's 5 unexpected voices with one mission, which is winning investments for children and families. The overall mission is to promote research-based, we have a large research department, very impressive, public investments that help at-risk kids have the opportunity to succeed and be prepared to compete in life and make our nation stronger. So our aim is to get strong arguments directly to policymakers and opinion leaders, especially those who don't naturally get to yes. It's not about the right arguments, but reality is the legislators don't get to yes very readily. So what are the right arguments? Anyone can make an argument, but if it comes from a cop or a retired general or a business leader, it has a lot more impact. So this includes crime prevention, workforce development, national security, and family strengthening arguments. So as we considered this, we understand that anyone can voice these arguments, but we tried to figure out who can make them most convincingly. So we started with law enforcement, and that would be fight crime, invest in kids, making the crime prevention argument. And then we moved to business leaders, and then military, athletes, etc. And we do this by building membership organizations of the unexpected messengers. We don't want a cop or business leader or general just to make the argument once, and then we move on. We want to build for the long term and have the capacity to have an ongoing presence, to build relationships, to have a drumbeat out there. So we have these 5 organizations: Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, our police chiefs, sheriffs, and prosecutors who promote investments in kids as the best way to reduce crime. And we currently have about 5,000 members nationwide. Secondly is Ready Nation, where I'm the deputy director, and we work with CEOs and other business leaders who promote investments in children as a key strategy for workforce and economic development. You've all heard about the shortage in the STEM careers, science, technology, engineering, and math. We are helping also get the word out that young children working with blocks and creative thinking skills will encourage them to be confident in science and math and maybe go on to pursue those careers later in life. Because it is a workforce and economic issue that we have here in the U.S. Mission readiness is retired generals and admirals who understand that the education, health, and social programs that enable young children to serve their country are the same programs that prepare them to be citizen ready and succeed in life, whatever career path they choose. And there's about 470 members nationwide. Shepherding the next generation is evangelical pastors and ministry leaders who view investments in children's programs as critical to strengthening families, and we currently have about 350 nationwide. And lastly, our newest is Champions for America's Future, athletes and coaches and administrators who promote programs that will help in the young children arena. So that is a summary of Council for a Strong America. So, whoops, let's connect the dots here. 90% of brain growth occurs by age 5. Just think about that, by age 5. Economically disadvantaged children can show up in kindergarten almost 18 months behind those peers who already have pre-K, and knowing half as many words. The learning gap shows up as early as 9 months old. Secondly, another statistic, if children start school ready to learn, they are twice as likely to read at grade level by grade 3. If children read at grade level by 3rd grade, they are 4 times more likely to graduate from high school. And if U.S. children graduate from high school, on average, they will earn $500,000 more, live 9 years longer, and be 6 times less likely to be arrested. In OECD countries, the similar gain is $250,000 for men and $150,000 for women. So you can see that early language is a key to success. So the early brain, if you haven't seen a slide like this on neurons, laying the foundation by creating 700 neurons per second. So you can see how our flexible brains, when we're born, grow neurons, and how important it is to give them all of these synapses for learning, which I'm not an expert, but you'll hear from somebody after me. So the foundation for later achievement starts during pregnancy. This was interesting to me because I did not realize that. I have 3 children. I was like, wow, I hope I did all the right things. I think I did. But you can see right here that it peaks from 1 to 3 years old, right here. So that's what we're talking about today, primarily. And then the achievement gap emerges by age 2. I thought this was very interesting because this slide shows the number of vocabulary words on the left correlating to parent involvement and the age level. So you have low-income level parents. The children come in with about 600 words at 16 months and so forth. You can see how it climbs. Then the working class parents, they learn about 800 words. And then university level or educated parents, 1,000 and, could be several thousand by 36 months of age. So it just shows that with low-income parents, economically disadvantaged, they're not reading to the kids, they're managing 2 or 3 jobs. Sometimes the older siblings are raising the younger babies and toddlers, and they're coming into kindergarten with far fewer vocabulary words, and language really is the key to success, as I said earlier. So the immediate economic benefits of early childhood learning, this is the short term. This is kind of a different bucket of economic benefits. It all has to do with creating preschools, hiring teachers, custodians to clean the classrooms, and all the jobs related to preschools. People who get jobs obviously spend more money locally, so we get a bigger return on our investment. Generally, economic productivity should look at high quality early learning in a competitive economic sector. So high quality early childhood care and education programs immediately generate approximately $2 for every $1 invested through the sale of goods and services. For example, a dollar invested in quality programs returns to the local community a total of, and here's 4 states, Illinois, $2.17, North Carolina, $1.91, New York State, $1.86, and Pennsylvania, $1.79. So this return on investment generates more additional spending than other economic sectors such as transportation, construction, retail and wholesale trade, manufacturing, and utilities. The 2000 Nobel laureate in economics rate of return to investments in human capital. Basically what this shows is investing more here instead of down here in the job training arena post-school really is a much greater benefit here. So here's where we're putting the money now. Here's where we should be putting them. So it's almost like compound interest. I like to use that analogy. If you invest in early education, you'll get much more for your money in terms of ROI. So what are we doing around the world in terms of evidence of the impacts of early learning, the studies that have been going on? A study of effective provision of preschool education project in the UK found that high-quality early education attendance showed an increase in the reading and numeracy skills of program children. Program children were also less likely to have special education needs than control children. And I was mentioning this morning that another program that we did, Start Smart, when I was at TRW Northrop Grumman, we went into the UK, we worked in the nursery schools, and we trained the teachers how to teach literacy through music, drama, art, and puppetry, and then the difference that made, and then training the teachers to teach other teachers, and then we also gave the children the Sesame Street book, We're the Same, We're Different, which I thought was a great book to hand out. And then in Germany, what's going on there? A study on German childcare found that early programs improved child development and led to decreased inequality across socioeconomic backgrounds. Numerous studies demonstrate the impacts of early education in Brazil, including increased second grade literacy, improved math scores in 4th grade, and increased rates of educational completion through college. Nutrition and parenting skills classes in Jamaica contributed to higher earnings, education, IQ, and less violence. So the overview of 56 studies across 23 countries in Africa, Central and South America, Asia, and Europe found impacts of early childhood programs on health, education, IQ, and emotional development. So the research is there. So I've just laid out all this evidence, and because of this evidence, the business community is speaking out. They know we need to do something in this age category. John Pepper is the former CEO of Procter & Gamble and the former chairman of the board for the Walt Disney Company. He's also chairman of our CEO task force at Ready Nation. And I had the opportunity to hear him speak before the U.S. Senate committee. I think it was in May, and he was fantastic. And this is a quote from that day. He said, "In business, we rarely have the luxury of making an investment decision with as much evidence as we have to support the economic value of investing in early childhood development and education." So, put bluntly, in my terms, they are a financial no-brainer. The only question is, how strong is the ROI? The answer, 2 or 3 or more to 1. So who is speaking out? Without going through, I know some of you in the back probably can't see this, but up here we have Ken McNeely, president of AT&T California. Gary Tobin, CEO, Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce. Alan Weber, founder, Fast Company. Gary Kai, Executive Director, Hawaii Business Roundtable, the former CEO of Continental Airlines, et cetera, et cetera. Massachusetts Business Roundtable. I think the point of this slide is just to show that we have business people or Nobel laureates all over the country who are speaking out. So business groups endorse early childhood in 49 states. And this morning I said, what about Nevada? I don't know. If anybody hears from Nevada, let us know. But Jeffrey Lacker, who's president of the Richmond Federal Reserve, has been a real outspoken person on the whole need for pre-K funding. And he said it's because of this. Gaps in skills that are important for adult incomes are observable by age 5 and tend to persist into adulthood. It makes economic sense to concentrate intensive human capital investment in the form of formal schooling on the young. So our leadership is broad across the country. It's not red and blue states. It's coast to coast. So Ready Nation members are speaking to the media and policymakers. This is just an example of some of the articles that have been placed. 230 media pieces in 2013 alone from Kansas City Business Journal, New York Times, The Olympian, The Intelligence, The Times Record, St. Louis Post. So it's media all over the country. And this is something that we ask you to do, maybe to help us get out there in front of the public and the media. So business leaders helped win policy victories through op-eds, writing letters to the editors, and talking to their local politicians. In 2013-14, again, $1 billion new state funds. In 2013, $2.3 billion new federal funds, which I mentioned earlier. But let's see where those came from. Here's some examples. Michigan, 2014, $65 million increase for preschool. Ohio, 2014, $16 million increase in pre-K budget. California, 2013, $55.8 million increase for early childhood. New York, 2014, $340 million increase for pre-K. Washington State, 2013, $57 million increase for a total of $114 million for the 2013-15 biennium. And lastly, at the national level, we helped win 2014 reauthorization of $400 million home visiting bill and the expansion of pre-kindergarten. So with all this evidence, what is it that we're asking Kiwanis to do? Let's bring it right down to where we are here. I mean, I know I've heard stories this morning about how you build playgrounds and you collect books and distribute them, et cetera. And those are fantastic boots on the ground activities. But actually, if you want to affect millions of children, we really need you to go out and talk to your local politicians and help us. We can write their op-eds for you. We write the letters to the editors from our offices. You can tweak them and put your name on it. If you want to join Ready Nation, we'd love to have you do this. But you can see here all of the difference that you can make if you do a lot more in terms of advocacy for us. So you can ask business groups to put successful development of children and youth on their policy and program agendas. You can offer employees information on engaging their young children in your companies. And you can provide expertise, volunteers, and resources to your local programs, too. So we have a one-stop shop website. In fact, we just redid our website. It'll be launched in November. It's going to be very comprehensive. Coming from a communications background, I was able to work with Ready Nation staff and kind of beefing up the website a little bit. We draft the op-eds, like I said, and your talking points and support you for your meetings with local policymakers. We have an e-newsletter with successes in research and media that you can read and keep yourself abreast of the latest and greatest research in this area. We have materials that you can adapt and brand your own in your own state. And we have ideas for CSR and CR projects on our website. So we like to say if you join us, there's no cost or meetings. And here is our website. And I also have some handouts if you want to complete the join list. We will enter you, we'll make it easy for you, and we'll put your name into our database. So lastly, this is the last slide, joining Ready Nation, just to summarize, I already said there's no cost or meetings. We only ask that you consider individual invitations to speak to the press, to state and federal policymakers and other key audiences. You can join as an individual. The company names are only used for ID purposes. And we support you by writing most of the media pieces, arranging the meetings, providing background, etc. So if you have 5 minutes, we will use it well. Thank you. Oh, let me close with one more. I didn't have this as a slide, but I really want to mention this. Business knows that the most important factor in business success is human capital, our employees, our workforce. So business is also becoming aware that the most important product our economy produces is ready for life 18-year-olds, our future workforce, because without them, there is no future. Thanks.
Robin, thank you very much. We wanted to go ahead and keep things fairly informal. Does anybody have any questions for Robin and Ready Nation as to what they do and how Kiwanis can partner with them? Right here, ma'am.
Yes, you can see many op-ed pieces on our website. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Robin? Robin, my takeaway was that this is early childhood education is a great investment,
yes,
and it's one that pays off even greater than the investments that we make in kids later in life, correct?
Exactly.
All right. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Oh, that's a question. Well, you saw the one of the slides that said for every dollar your ROI is $2. I think just expanding on that, it just shows that investing in the early childhood arena, and I mean federal dollars and state dollars, we all know how precious they are. There's so many needs out there in our country, and we're looking at so many crises around the world right now, and I'm sure our defense budget is being looked at again. But if you look at where the need is to get these kids ready for kindergarten, to get them successful in school. I mean, as a business person, that's our workforce. And if we don't have a good workforce, if we don't have kids that are ready to go into the military to help us around the country, we're in trouble. So all the research shows that there is a tremendous ROI, economically advantageous for us to invest our dollars, our public funds, into early childhood education. Thank you.
Okay, we are back on schedule now. Just to review, we did want to introduce our featured speaker now. She is, as we said, Dr. Nancy Swagonski. Again, just as a review, Dr. Swagonski is a pediatrician, a professor of pediatrics at IU School of Medicine and professor of public health in the Fairbanks School of Public Health. She is the director of community outreach for Riley's Neurodevelopmental and Behavioral Disorders, which provides outreach and early diagnosis for children with developmental delay and autism spectrum disorders. She also serves on multiple state and national committee and is the current president of the Indiana chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Her grant funding and publications reflect her broad interests in system design, implementation science, and improving the quality of care, especially for our most vulnerable children. Again, as I mentioned earlier, her topic today is the first 2,000 days, early diagnosis of brain development and issues, and building a system of care with every child's community. Please join me in welcoming once again Dr. Nancy Swagonski.
Start off. Okay, and then the pointer. Okay. All right, I know that everybody wanted a featured speaker who was going to talk about neurobiology. I'm going to go through some really critical points in terms of brain development and neurobiology and something called toxic stress. And I'm going to go through these relatively rapidly, so hold on to your seats, but hopefully it will be interesting. And I'm not even going to give you time to really read these slides because I'm going to highlight them one at a time. So as you've already heard, the brain grows rapidly in the first 3 years of life. I hope that those of you who are parents have already seen something called the growth charts, right? So when you come in for your well child care visit, your pediatrician maps not only your child's height and weight, but they're actually measuring your child's head size. And the reason is that we are actually mapping how well is the brain growing. And in fact, in the first year of life, the brain doubles in size, and by the time you're age 3, you have 80% of the size of an adult brain. Again, you've heard that one of the things that's interesting that's going on is really this growth of connections in the brain. And in fact, there's a really rapid rise of those connections. This is a slide that Robin also showed. What I want to point out is these dots, which are the neurons, and then all these wire-looking things, which are the connections between the neurons. And if you really look at this, going from birth to 6 months to 2 years of age, there really aren't many more dots in there. In fact, the growth of the brain is primarily around the connectivity of what's happening within the brain. So, second critical point is genes serve as a blueprint for your brain architecture, but it's really something called epigenetic mechanisms that determine what is turned on and turned off. So what does this mean? Well, we all have heard of DNA, right? It carries our genetic information, it determines our characteristics. It is, in fact, the same in every cell. So your skin cell, your heart cell, your liver cell, the DNA is all the same. So what's different? What's different is the epigenetics, the information on top of that DNA code that turns some genes on and others off, silencing some genes and activating others. Now, there's two main, I get to biochemistry here, mechanisms. One is DNA methylation, which actually suppresses gene expression, and the other is histone acetylation, which makes gene expression easier. If you want to know anything more about that than what I've just said, you'll need to ask somebody else. All right. So where's the real research? What's so interesting? Well, we knew epigenetic mechanisms occurred not during fetal development, right, when cells are specializing into that heart cell, that brain cell, that skin cell. But what we've really found now is that this epigenetic turning on and turning off of genes continues after birth and is influenced by the environment. And when I say environment here, I really mean it broadly. How much stimulation are you getting? What is the emotional status that you're in most of the time? How many words are you hearing? And you'll see some of those things that Robin talked a little bit about already. Well, we've kind of known this, right? We've known that there's epigenetic mechanisms because we've known it from nature. If you have a moth that comes out of its pupa, forgetting that science, during a wet season versus a dry season, in fact, the wing pattern is different. So the genes are the same, but the environment is influencing the patterning of the wings. This is a super important study. It's actually very famous in the medical community, called the agouti mouse study. These two mice are genetically identical. They're genetically identical, except they both carry something called the agouti gene. And the mouse on your right, the mother of that mouse was fed a nutrient-rich environment. She was able to silence, through epigenetic mechanisms, that agouti gene. And so the mouse on the right developed normally. The one on the left obviously is more obese, more likely actually to develop mouse diabetes and hypertension, and has an unusual coat color. We know this is true in humans as well. We know that we can have genetically identical twins, and yet they can have different diseases. Genetically identical twins can have One may have autism and the other may not. One may develop cancer and the other may not. This is a slide actually from NOVA, and what it shows is in fact those areas of methylation that I talked about. And what you see is the slide on the left in 3-year-old identical twins. There's a lot of yellow areas. Yellow areas means that there's equal methylation between the two twins. On the right, the green areas are areas where there is hypermethylation when you compare one twin to the other. And the red areas is when there are hypo or less methylation. So what you really see is over the course of our lifetime, our DNA is being tagged and expressed differently depending on how it is turned on or turned off. So how does this intersect with neurobiology and epigenetics and brain architecture? So we talked a little bit about how there's rapid growth really in the first 3 years, but continues until about 6 years. But what do you notice about this 14-year-old? In fact, we start pruning the brain, and it's a really important mechanism so that things that we use get stronger, what isn't used gets pruned away. And again, this makes common sense to us. If we think about learning a foreign language, if we learn it when we're young, we can often speak it without accent and grammatically correct syntax. As we get older, we certainly can learn it, but it's much more difficult. So this translates into very sensitive periods in early brain development. And we've long known that there's sensitive periods for vision and hearing. There's something in medicine called cognitive blindness. And what that means is that some children are born with a weak muscle in one eye, and that eye will turn in. So the eye is normal, the brain is normal, but the child has to choose which eye they're actually going to look with, because otherwise they'll be seeing cross-eyed. And so one eye gets stronger and get used. And this eye that is anatomically normal, if we don't correct that muscle weakness, that child will actually develop blindness in that eye. So again, normal brain at the beginning, normal eye, but if you don't use it, you lose it. And that's very true for vision and hearing. What's really been interesting in research is that we're finding out that that's also true for habitual ways of responding and emotional control. And I was in a meeting with some preschool teachers, and we were trying to talk a little bit about kindergarten readiness and how you define that. And the teachers said something that really hit home with me because of this slide. They said, give me a child who can control their frustration and who is persistent, and I can teach them all of these other things that you learn in school, such as your numbers, your language, your symbols. All right. So this is, actually there's one more hypothesis that I have about the pruning, and if any of you all want to fund my research, let me know. But this is the hypothesis that I'd like to test. All right. Fourth critical point. Toxic stress reduces neural connections in the brain when they should be building. So we've talked about how important the building of these connections are. So this is a model that talks about stress. So when children have experiences that are protective and personal versus insecure and impersonal, they will have certain epigenetic changes, the way their genes are being expressed. That will influence their brain development, which then influences their behavior, which in turn again influences experience. And I actually am going to go through this model in a couple of different ways just to help it hit home. So we define stress in 3 levels. So one is positive stress. So in fact, stress can be really positive. If I saw a snake crawling across this platform, I would jump away, my heart rate would go up, and it's probably a pretty good idea to get out of here. We actually know when you're learning that stress is helpful in learning situations. But the idea behind positive stress is that you have increases that are actually relatively mild and they don't last chronically. What is tolerable stress? Well, tolerable stress is kind of that next level of stress where it can be serious, but again, it's temporary. It isn't chronic. And in children, what we find is that even tolerable stress can really be buffered if you have supportive, nurturing relationships. So you can put a child in a stressful situation, but when their mom or dad walks into that room, picks them down and calms them down, all of their stress hormones come back down to a normal level. Then we have toxic stress. So this is prolonged chronic activation of the stress response systems, things that we see in children who live in poverty, who live in homes with neglect, who live in homes that have other kinds of environmental stressors. And in general, they don't have those protective relationships built around them to react to stress. So again, you guys are really interested in neuroendocrine and neurobiology, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Prolonged activation of the stress response system actually causes the chronic fight or flight release, gonadotropic releasing hormone, and the release of adrenaline. So again, people talk about fight or flight, your epinephrine, your adrenaline, your heart rate goes up, and cortisol, which is the stress hormone, which actually we now know causes changes in the brain architecture. So this is a study that is actually in a mouse model. And on your right, this is a mouse who underwent toxic stress. What they did was they actually shocked the mouse, and they didn't allow there to be any predictive interval of shock, and they didn't allow the mouse to push a button or do something to get rid of the shock. So that was toxic. This mouse couldn't do anything. There was no way to relieve it. And if you look at the neurons and the connectivity here compared to a typical mouse, it's easy to see that, in fact, this is a damaged neuron with fewer connections. So we have biologic evidence of stress and high cortisol and epinephrine levels actually causing damage to the neuron. Unfortunately, we also see this in children. So on your right is a child actually from a Romanian orphanage who was fed a typical diet, but this child had very little to no stimulation. And what you see, this is a PET scan, and so what it's showing is high levels of metabolic activity. Anytime you see the color, it's metabolic activity going on. But notice in the circles that are drawn here, in the child that underwent severe neglect, there's no activity going on in the area of what's called the prefrontal cortex. That's where you get your executive function. That's where your superego lives, where you control your emotions and do rational thought processes. All right, so toxic stress causes an increase in your chronic fight or flight hormones called adrenaline and cortisol, which actually causes changes in your brain architecture, which in turn, because you don't have good connectivity between your frontal lobes and your lower part of your brain, causes hyper-responsive stress responses. And again, it becomes a vicious cycle. This is a study called the Adverse Childhood Events Study. And so what we see in children is that as children undergo toxic environments or toxic stress, so there's many things that were measured here, such as did they live in a family where there was domestic abuse? Were there a parent incarcerated? Was there a low income? Was there low socioeconomic or educational level. And what they found was that as you increase the number of adverse things, the chance of that child having developmental delays increased it in a linear fashion. And in fact, if you had 7 adverse events under 3 years of age, there was a 100% chance that you would end up with developmental delay. This is how the environment affects our children and affects their brain development. This is a slide that Robin actually just shows, and what we call it is the 30 million word gap by age 3. And what you see is that really, as kids start out, there isn't much difference in terms of their communication, in terms of pointing and things like that. But as they grow older, it gets wider and wider. And in fact, this, the reason we call this the 30 million word gap is it's been estimated that children that are 3 years old that live in households with professional parents have had 30 million more words spoken directly to them than children who live in poverty. So think about that in terms of use it or lose it. You've had 30 million more words spoken directly to you. So this is, again, the Adverse Childhood Events Study. There's a great website on the CDC if you want to read about it. Sorry, that looks a little fuzzy. But basically, it talks about adverse childhood events, the social, emotional, and cognitive impairment that comes from that, the fact that you then end up adopting some health risk behaviors, which leads to disease, disability, social problems, and in fact, early death. So what are we learning? This is just some more studies around neurobiology and epigenetics and how we're beginning to understand turning on and turning off of the genome that causes depression, autism, maltreatment, asthma. In fact, I just read something on asthma that we used to think that cigarette smoking exposure postnatally was related to asthma. And in fact, there's pretty good evidence now that it may be prenatal, in the womb exposure, that actually causes the asthma. All right. So again, this is just one more way of looking at this model, talking about early adversity with toxic stress, environmental exposures, malnutrition, causing this biological embedding or changes during sensitive periods of brain and organ development. There's a cumulative burden over time that actually leads to physiologic disruption in children's brains, but also in as you go into adulthood, you see it in neuroendocrine function, metabolic function with obesity and diabetes, cardiovascular and immune system, and we know that children who have undergone early adversity end up dying at a younger age than those who have not. So, early life experiences trigger epigenetic modifications that alter brain and organ structure and function. We used to talk about nature versus nurture, and we really know now it's nature and nurture in this very complex intersection. And just to hit this home one more time, this is a quote that I absolutely love. This is a pediatrician by the name of Andy Garner. And he wrote an article about what every pediatrician should know about epigenetics and the genomic revolution. And what he says is you may inherit your genes from your parents, but that does not mean that they interact in the same way, depending on how the environment plays with those switches. So think if you have 2 identical keyboards or 2 exactly identical genes or genetic markings, but depend on which key is struck relative to the others, what's turned on or turned off, you have either Billy Joel or Chopin. All right, so 5th critical point, evidence-based interventions improve outcomes and are cost-effective. This is really taken from the RAND study that is worthwhile for everybody to look. What they did was something called a meta-analysis. And it is a scientific way to put different studies together to come up with a scientific conclusion. And they really ask 3 questions. Are high-quality early intervention programs effective? What are their attributes? And is there a return on investment? So Robin really talked about some of the shorter-term return on investment in terms of immediately as you hire people and other things you get a return on investment. And we're going to talk more about long-term. So they really looked at 2 kinds of programs or a combination. So really parent education and supports or early childhood education in a center-based setting. And these are some examples. And I know we have an international audience here, but I actually want to talk a little bit about Indiana. So we certainly have Nurse-Family Partnership, and Kevin talked this morning a little bit about them. We don't have it throughout our entire state. We used to have parents as teachers. We have some people I know at Riley that do incredible years. We had HIPPY, but I think that was in the northern part of the state, and we've lost funding for that. We certainly have Head Start and early Head Start, but as a pediatrician, I know that there's waiting lists for kids to get into that. Our where did it go? Reach Out and Read, one of my favorite, is a program where we actually have pediatricians give books to children during their well child care visit and model for parents how to read a book to a child. What's really fascinating is when you have a 6-month-old and you have those books that just have pictures of babies' faces, how much they love that. And some of our low-income families and at-risk families don't understand that that's reading and the earliest literacy. So we've also actually lost our funding for Reach Out and Read. So we have a lot of work to do here in Indiana. But basically, the RAND study found that studies going back 30 years have found that intervention in the first 3 years can improve outcomes. And we improve outcomes in academic achievement, behavior, educational progression and attainment, delinquency and crime, and labor market success. I am going to remind you of these outcomes because we're going to go back to them when I finish. The key findings of what had more favorable results really aren't much surprise. Again, better trained caregivers, smaller child-to-staff ratios, and parental involvement. And when we look at the long-term return on investment, in fact, these programs generate between $1.80 and $17 for each dollar spent on the program. And many of them now have follow-up 30 to 40 years old. So these are some of the ones that are the oldest and best study, the Abadasarian project, the Nurse-Family Partnership, and again, the Perry Preschool project. And it's sort of interesting, I actually have one of my best friends was living in Michigan, and she was a single parent, and her children were enrolled in the Perry Preschool project. And she is now a nurse practitioner and said, I would have never gone to school, never gone on to get my degree if I hadn't had that project. One of her daughters, we may not be able to count as a success because she's a psychologist in Hollywood treating the stars. All right, this you've also already seen, but again, it's James Heckman, a Nobel laureate economist at the University of Chicago, basically again showing we get the biggest bang for our buck when we invest early. So, how are we doing in Indiana? Well, here we are, in case you didn't know where we were. And one of the things that we know we have to do is to find children at risk early. And there's a website called childhealthdata.org. If you've never looked on it, it's really worthwhile. It's all one word. But it basically allows you to pull off maps like this and compare your state to other states in a variety of different health indicators. So how are we doing in terms of developmental screening? Well, more children in Indiana actually have developmental delay than nationally, but we actually screen fewer children. I'm going to talk a little bit about autism because it's a neurodevelopmental disability that we know responds to that early intervention when there's brain plasticity. You guys probably have all heard about the rapid rise, and we really don't understand it. You know, there's been more than 120 genes implicated in autism, and in fact, there probably are these epigenetic phenomenon that are turning on or turning off those genes that actually are coming into play with autism. But this is a huge rise. Back here when I was in training, 30 kids in Indiana public schools with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. We now have over 14,000. So how are we doing at finding those children? Well, in fact, we diagnose half as many children in the state as they do nationally under the age of 3. We need to do better. We have our work cut out for us. So what are we doing? Well, we have a team that we've put together with many partners. I love talking to the Kiwanis because one of the things that they frequently talk about is their partnerships and leveraging those partnerships for the best outcomes. We started with Healthy People 2020 goals. How many people know what Healthy People is? So a few. So the Department of Health and Human Services, I think you can correct me, but I think it was back in 1980 was the first time it was put out, sets health goals for the nation. And so it's what we're supposed to strive for to make things better. And the Healthy People 2020 goal around developmental screening or identifying a risk is that by 24 months of age, we should identify that children have a risk. By 36 months of age, we should make a diagnosis, and by 48 months, there should be intervention. And I have to tell you, I think it's not good enough. We're not doing it in our state, but it's still, that goal is not good enough. And we are really pushing and hoping that everybody in the state will start saying this mantra. If I come up to you and said, 18, 24, 30, what would you think of? I hope what you're thinking of is finding at-risk kids early, getting them in for diagnosis and intervention. So 18, 24, 30. But we have a problem. So one of the things I loved about President Gunter was that he said we need to listen, learn, and act. But you know what? It's that acting part that is the hard part. When you look at medical knowledge, it doubles so quickly. In 1950, medical knowledge doubled in about 50 years. By 1980, it doubled within 7 years. By 2010, it doubles every 3.5 years. And in 2020, it's projected, medical knowledge is projected to double in just 73 days. How do you keep up with that, right? So students beginning medical school in 2010 will see 3 doublings in knowledge by the time they complete their training. It takes about 7 years to complete your training. And what was learned in the first 3 years of medical school will be just 6% of what is known by 2020. So I have people tell me, well, why don't pediatricians know about autism? When I was training, there were 30 kids in the state. They're right. I didn't learn about autism. So how do we actually change from listening, learning to acting when things are changing so rapidly? So I love this. We need to move, whoops, I'm going to go back. We need to move beyond just listening and learning to really acting. And I put this in just because this is a great quote that I found. How do you change behavior? And especially, how do you change behavior in medicine? So I'm going to let you take just a minute to read it. So I hear things like this about electronic medical records. I hear things like this about even doing developmental screening in your practice. I hear all sorts of concerns and excuses. So who wants to guess what they were talking about? We need to change, we need to grow, but we also need a method to support change. So the other thing I'm really going to talk about today is something called implementation science and why we need it. So what we do with implementation is move from not knowing just what we should be doing, but how it is that we're going to do it. Behavior is very difficult to change. Education is necessary but not sufficient for behavior change. So one of the first things you have to do when you're going to change something is to actually define what the core elements or drivers are. And we decided that we wanted to improve identification of children at risk within Indiana. And so we defined these things as our core drivers: community-based screening, early evaluation with rapid access leading to a tiered system of diagnosis, utilization of evidence-based standardized instruments, quality improvement and tracking of data, sharing of best practices, experiences, and a community focus to ensure the receipt of those services that are family-centered and involve all aspects of a child's community. So we affectionately call the model that we drew our tree. And it really is called a tree because it starts with its roots down here in the community. And what we do is we work with the community to ensure developmental screening within primary care. And then we're training community hubs to make early diagnosis. And then as children need more and more specialized care, then we allow further and further referrals to Riley or other children's systems. The other tool that's frequently used in implementation science is algorithms. And I'm not actually going to walk you through this, but this was an algorithm for developmental screening that was written 8 years ago. Is a policy by the American Academy of Pediatrics. I was one of the authors on this. And guess what? We're still not doing it. 8 years ago in this state, we're still not doing it. So we really need to help pediatricians change their behavior and adopt best practices. And we are literally walking into their offices with the tools that they need, and frankly, me wearing my president of AAP hat and saying, this is standard of care and we do need to do it. So who wants to guess how long? 8 years sounds horrible, and frankly, I think it is. But what's the average time from the finding of an evidence-based practice to full implementation? What's the average time? Anybody know?
Lifetime.
Well, lifetime is probably a good answer, but 11 to 13 years in general. So 8 years, I guess we're on our timeline. So if you look at this algorithm, what they say is that you would do surveillance. You'll look at and identify risk factors at every child care visit. But then we actually use a standardized screening tool at 9, 18, and 24 or 30 months of age, and do autism-specific screening at 18 and 24 months. If you then find a concern, this is screening, not diagnosis, then you need to do a developmental evaluation, a medical evaluation, and refer for early intervention services. And then follow up on those referrals and continually track the child's developmental status. So I'm going to talk very briefly about our hub. So that's this. So primary care is doing the developmental screening, finding children that may be at risk. We actually want to refer them in for diagnosis or further if they need additional testing. So we ask when we work with communities for them to sign a memorandum of understanding, basically to promote the use of these standardized tools, to develop a team of a nurse, a physician, a care coordinator, and other staff to complete a curriculum that we've developed, to accept referrals of children with concerns based on screening. And our goal is really across systems and across insurers. There are many children that haven't been screened, and we need to remove many of the financial and political barriers that are there, and then provide the medical workup and evaluation. We also ask that they participate as part of a learning community, do quality improvement. We actually collect their data. If we're going to do diagnosis out in the community, we want to make sure that if we make a diagnosis in Bloomington, it's the same as if the child had come to Riley, as if they're in, actually South Bend is our most recent site. And we want to promote family-centered and community care. This is some of the elements of the curriculum. I'll give you just a second to look through it. And I think you remember I said that the average age of diagnosis in Indiana is 63 months. And that's what this bar is. So this is our baseline where we are. This really is our goal at 36 months. And what we do is each month we plot what the average age of the children are that we diagnose. And the average age of diagnosis now in our clinics is 32.1 months, half the state average, and well under 36 months. We have made enormous strides. This is a map that basically you can see the stars. Actually, they're a little light here, but these are areas that we plan on going. The ones in the blue are where we have our early diagnosis hubs. And what we did was basically take that county and get contiguous counties. And if we do that, we pulled out census data, and we will in fact cover 92.7% of the 0 to 4-year-olds in our state with early screening and diagnosis. So, summary and closing thoughts. Going back to this quote, why am I talking about 18 to 24-year-olds? But this really struck me. I actually heard it for the first time from Robert Duggar with Ready Nation. 75% of 18 to 24-year-olds cannot get a job as a private in the U.S. Army because they lack a diploma, they have a criminal record, they have problems with drug and alcohol, or health problems such as obesity, asthma, actually dental caries is a big one. And what I want you to do is I ask you to remember the benefits of early intervention. And I think you can start mapping in between here. So we know early intervention over long periods of time actually improve these things. We're more likely to have an 18-year-old who's ready to come out to move to his next level of education or to be employed. And it's why businesses are saying, gosh, this is really important to us. We've got to have a workforce. And therefore, you've got to start early. Also got this from Ready Nation. I love it. Healthy child development is, in fact, the foundation of all of these things. But what generally happens, I love this too, we have genetics, we talked about that. We have environment, we talked about that. Then we expect some kind of miracle to occur and we get this great results down here. This should remind you, it's kind of roughly drawn in, of the growth of the brain, right? So I said that by the time you're 3 years old, you're at 85%, 80 to 85% of your brain growth. This is public investment related to brain growth. So what can you do? I always think in terms of time, talent, and treasure, but certainly advocate for evidence-based programs. This isn't political. This is not whether you're red or blue. This is about our children. Write letters, educate your legislators, ask them to support early childhood programs. Partner with other organizations. The other thing I really enjoyed about this morning, again, was how people were talking about leveraging. So work with each other around early childhood. We all need to come together as a community. Find, as Robin said, those unexpected messengers. You can find partners that don't usually talk about this, right? You can find the police task force. You can find those other people. Gather them together and show them that this is a community priority. And then support implementation, really that step beyond education. It takes more work, it actually takes more money, but just to do education without implementation does nothing. So that's it.
We do have a few minutes if anybody has any questions for Dr. Nancy about early childhood intervention. One right here in the middle.
Do your schools do any early interventions before kindergarten?
Yeah, so certainly the public schools for children who are found to have developmental delay, there is preschool special education. So we have early intervention, Part C of IDEA is for 0 to 3 years old, and then once they hit 3, they can go to special education within preschools.
So are you identifying those or the schools identifying?
Probably a little of both. So it's interesting for me as a pediatrician because as kids get older, the adolescents don't really like to come to the doctor. But when you look at capturing a population of young children, generally parents are really good about bringing their children in for well child care visits and their immunizations and other things when they're less than 2. So in fact, the pediatric office in that age group is a great place to find these kids.
I'm going to repeat the questions for our web audience. In the back, I saw one. Yes, ma'am?
What's your opinion on screen time and electronics on early childhood development, especially for children under the age of 3?
The question is about screen time for children in early childhood development. What type of recommendations?
Yeah, there's some really interesting research coming out that shows that you can actually have increases in vocabulary and some learning from screen time, but in fact, it is like tenfold better when you have a person and it's interactive. The problem with screen time is that you don't get the undulation in the voice, you don't get the emotional attachment as part of that learning and what's important, and usually the excitement that goes along with that parent and the nurturing environment. So, you know, pediatricians in general don't like screen time. Some of my views have been challenged a little bit lately, but we still know that a person is best.
Any more questions, sir?
This is more of a comment. You mentioned earlier, you implied that parents as teachers affiliates don't exist in Indiana, and the fact is they sporadically exist, and they're alive and well in Wayne County.
Great. So if everybody heard that, Parents as Teachers is in Wayne County and a few other places, so that's great.
Our neighbors to the east doing well. In the back.
I'm curious about, I've seen studies about attention deficit disorder and the use of medications in the United States compared to some of the European countries. Is there research linking any of that to our lack of early childhood development programs, or can you just comment on that, those kinds of statistics and what they might mean for us?
The question was about medication for attention deficit disorder.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I can answer your question directly. I do know that between 5 and 7% of children have ADHD, and people talk a lot about we may be medicating or over-medicating the children, but I challenge you to find in any community or population where 5% have medication. So as a pediatrician, many times what I find is people are very afraid of medicine, and yet when parents actually try it, that the children do remarkably well. And most of those medications have been used for 50 years or more and are relatively safe. And so I think any time that you put a child on medication, it's certainly a decision that needs to be made with the family and with the other people in their environment and how you're going to use it, when you're going to use it, et cetera. And it needs good follow-up. So I'm not opposed to medication in children with ADHD.
We do have time for one more question for Dr. Nancy if anyone has anything.
There's one way back there.
Way in the back.
What I'm finding where I am is, as far as the early intervention and the diagnosis of autism, up until about before our children are pre-K, we diagnose them with an ED label and don't give them an autism label because that we won't do until they enter kindergarten, unless it's a medical model where the parents would take them. And many of our parents are low income, so usually don't go that route. Not that we do give them resources, but so that's where a lot of our children are not being diagnosed early enough.
The question was about early diagnosis for autism, and obviously that would be key in treating it.
Yeah. So I agree. One of our big challenges in this state is many of the low-income families are on Medicaid, and as you know, Medicaid pays extremely poorly. For the 2-hour diagnostic visit that we do with the extra testing, the follow-up, basically we are paid $160, which is $80 an hour. So that includes a physician times, a nurse's time, the billing person, the front desk person, your health insurance, your, all the things that it takes to actually run a business. So we lose money on these early diagnosis hubs, and our partners have been terrific in that they've said that they would agree to lose money for about another 18 months while we work within Medicaid and other places to get more fair payment. We can't survive, frankly, on those kind of payment levels, and that's caused huge barriers for low-income families. What we find, we actually developed one of our hubs, I don't know if you remember the map, but down in New Albany, and the reason was we're actually working with a pediatrician in private practice, and she sees a large portion of children with Medicaid. Her privately insured families can go across the river to Corsair Children's Hospital, but her families who have Medicaid cannot. And she said, what can I do? Otherwise, they have to travel 2.5 hours to come up to Indianapolis for diagnosis. And she asked us, even though she knew she would be losing money, at least initially, she asked us if we would train them how to do this early diagnosis. And so we went down there and did it. I think this is one of the areas where I think we need real advocacy, is around payment levels that are fair.
Dr. Nancy, as the saying goes, and she'll be here later on for more questions as well, but we do need to say that Dr. Nancy is literally, as the saying goes, outstanding in her field. She is one of the leaders in our state, and we want to thank her for taking the time to talk with us today and sharing all that fascinating information. Nancy, thank you. We are going to continue now with our program. Get our tools all set up here. We are now honored to be joined by Melanie Brizzi, someone who has helped us at Fox 59 repeatedly with our stories on this important issue. She joins us from the Indiana Family and Social Services Administration Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning. Now, for those of us in Indiana, especially in Indianapolis right now, the issue and the debates about quality pre-kindergarten education are front and center. We cover it virtually every day. In 2013, Indiana State Governor Mike Pence tapped Melanie as part of a statewide early learning advisory committee. Now, through her work, Melanie is among state leaders preparing to implement a pilot program to spur high-quality pre-kindergarten education opportunities throughout our state. She is here to join us. She is joining us now to talk about that particular program. Please make Melanie Brizzi welcome.
The first challenge is getting up the ramp here without falling. Good afternoon. Thanks. It's great to be here with you today and have the opportunity to speak with both Robin and Nancy, and to be in a room filled with folks who share a passion for early childhood. And it is true, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Indiana's pre-K pilot, but on the heels of listening to our first two speakers, I also want to talk more generally about early childhood, early care and education, and also give you some updates on child care and some of the quality initiatives that we have within the Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning. So for some of you, you may not be very familiar with the Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning. We previously were known as the Bureau of Child Care because one of our responsibilities is the licensing and registration of child care. And when I think back to some of the slides we've seen so far today, you can see how important those years between birth to age 5 are and how important then child care becomes to the development of those children. But recently, with some of our new responsibilities with the pre-K pilot and the work that we do with school-age children as well, we really felt that it was important to change the name of the division and become the Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning. Plus, it just presents a challenge to say such a long title all the time, so we're always up for a challenge. I do believe, and we have heard, that there's a lot of work to be done around early childhood in Indiana and across our nation. But I also believe in Indiana we are at a turning point, and we are seeing a lot of good work beginning to come together. And I'm excited to be part of that. I want to tell you a little bit about some of that groundwork that we have been laying over the years. So through the Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning and the Federal Health and Human Services Office of Child Care, my office administers what is called the Child Care Development Block Grant, or CCDBG. You may be familiar with this program known as the CCDF Voucher Program. And so what this is a federal funding stream that comes into the state. We have about $200 million a year. There's a state match, so it's federal and state dollars. The vast majority of this funding goes to direct services to support low-income families who are working or going to school. So the CCDBG program was set up as a two-pronged approach to poverty reduction. And that first arm is providing families with access to childcare so that they can go to work or school or vocational training to work toward economic self-sufficiency. And so we serve about 38,000 children a month on the CCDF voucher program. Again, their parents, which primarily our clients are single-family households, are working or going to school, and the CCDF program will support the cost of childcare during that time. So while we're serving 38,000 children a month, the need is great, and we have about 10,000 children on our wait list waiting for a CCDF voucher. So why is this important to what we've been talking about? Well, first of all, a common theme of a lack of resources. If we have 25% of Indiana's children living in poverty, we know we have a high demand for the CCDF voucher. We estimate about 300,000 Hoosier children between 0 and 5 will need some sort of child care. And it is essential that it's not any child care, but that it's actually high quality child care that's supporting that child's developmental needs, particularly in that care that's publicly funded. We want to make sure that we're utilizing every dollar to its best resource. And part of that includes making sure that CCDF families have true access to high quality, affordable child care. For a low income parent, the number one barrier to getting to work is this child care. And studies have shown that high quality child care improves productivity at work, reduces absenteeism, reduces tardiness, because that parent is assured that their child is in safe arms while they are at work. So this becomes a workforce issue. This enables our low-income families to get to work and to hopefully this is that first arm of the poverty cycle, breaking the poverty cycle, to work towards economic self-sufficiency. So it's important, and I believe that it's every child's right to high-quality care and education while their parents are working. Particularly these low-income families. Families should not have to choose between a low-quality provider because that is all that they can afford. We have seen that the risk of that are far too high. So here comes the second arm of the CCDF program and how it works to prevent poverty and the continuation of the cycle of poverty. And that is through quality improvement investments. So with the CCDBG grant money that comes into the state, we are required and able to spend a portion of that funding on quality improvement initiatives. And this is really important. We invest between $13 to $16 million a year of this CCDBG money in quality improvement. And those investments go to a wide range of provider types, including family child care homes, which are really a critical component of early care and education in the state of Indiana, particularly in our rural areas. Also licensed child care centers, preschools, public and private-based early care and education, and our faith-based programs, registered ministries. And so we invest in numerous different activities, and you saw some of those things listed on those evidence-based interventions that show a return on investment. So for example, we support scholarships so that caregivers can receive a CDA credential, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, funded by the Teach Scholarship Program. We invest in free and low-cost training for caregivers so that they are giving that kind of responsive caregiving that shows a return on investment for young children. And the quality initiatives continue on. And one of the things that we're most proud of, and I do this all the time, I write out everything and then I continue to talk, and so we'll just keep moving forward. One of the things that we're most proud of is our Paths to Quality system. And what Paths to Quality is, it's a quality rating and improvement system for early care and education programs, as well as those out-of-school time programs serving school-aged children, that is designed to really support these programs in reaching their quality improvement goals. Paths to Quality was started here in Indiana statewide in 2009, so we're 5 years in. So when I think about the 11 to 13 year period for implementation science, I'm very pleased at the progress that we have. Paths to Quality is a voluntary system for early care and education programs. That is an important component of it. Programs who agree to participate and register to participate are committed to quality improvement. And they receive the kind of training around, you heard Nancy talking about the importance of screenings. And in the diagram that she showed next to families there would very well be that early care and education program that is assisting the family. These providers are with children 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. They are one of the primary caregivers and can be very supportive in that process of identifying children with special needs, identifying them early. So within Paths to Quality, it's a 4-level system. At level 1 is health and safety. So in Indiana, we also have this dynamic within childcare, and it's not unusual. Most states have this dynamic, where we have a very diverse and complicated landscape of childcare. And as a family, when you go to choose a program that best meets your needs, it's often difficult to know what are you getting because our regulations are so diverse. One of the things my office does is regulate childcare providers, so we're very familiar with the challenges that this poses to families. And we get these calls every day that I didn't know my childcare program didn't have to, and then you can fill in the blank. Follow child to staff ratios, which we heard is another evidence-based intervention, and other things such as supervise my children. So we know parents are facing this dilemma of how to choose childcare and how do I know that my provider is meeting the basic health and safety standards. So at level 1 of Paths to Quality, families can be assured that regardless of the sector or auspice from which they're choosing, family childcare home, faith-based, church, school, preschool, that a level 1 Paths to Quality provider has met those critical basic health and safety standards. And then we build on from there, providing the supports, awards, incentives, training, technical assistance, on-site coaching, resources through the Child Care Development Block Grant to improve the quality of care of those programs. At level 2, programs build in learning environments and child-teacher interactions. We're learning through research how important those interactions are between a child and their caregiver. Those standards are built in at level 2 of Paths to Quality. Then at level 3, those programs must have a curriculum and utilize a curricula that aligns with the Department of Education's early learning guidelines. We call those the foundations here in Indiana. And by doing so, and by doing it very intentionally, we can ensure that children are having the types of early learning experiences that prepare them for school and future academic success. Level 4 is the highest level of Paths to Quality, and that includes national accreditation by a recognized accrediting body For example, the National Association for the Education of Young Children is one of those that we accredit. So with 5 years in a purely voluntary system, we have over 2,300 early learning programs enrolled. We lead the nation among voluntary quality rating and improvement systems. And this is really important when you think about our pre-K initiative. Over 800 of those programs across the state are actually rated at the highest 2 levels. So those levels in which that curriculum, aligning with the Department of Education standards for kindergarten, is implemented and offered to children and their families, as well as additional training around those key components like assessments and like interactions and sensitive caregiving to minimize the effects of what we sometimes see with the toxic stress in child care. So it's all in response to what research is telling us is best practice. So we fund Paths to Quality with our CCDBG quality dollars. And that is, again, one of our key components. Families can look as they're choosing a provider. They know if their provider has voluntarily enrolled, they're committed to quality improvement, and they can tell by that rated level, it's rated by an independent third party, where that provider is around meeting these key quality standards for children. We also have several other initiatives that's really important for you to know about and that are tied to these quality investments that we've made in early education in the state. The first of which was created during the last 2013, session before last, and it's called the Early Education Matching Grant. And again, this was created in the legislature. It appropriates $2 million a year for 2 years to high quality early education programs for low income 4-year-olds, really designed to be a capacity building grant initiative. In this matching grant, it's a competitive grant. Last year, our office awarded 30 grants in 15 different counties across the state to serve these low-income 4-year-olds. And part of the structure of the early education matching grant is these programs must be a level 3 or level 4 on Paths to Quality, ensuring that minimum quality standard. And they must also raise a cash match in a 1-to-1 value. So while we released $1.5 million in grant funds, those programs had to raise, and they actually exceeded their 1-to-1 cash match, which I thought was a great indicator of a community's level of involvement in early education. So this year, we have over $3 million going out to build the capacity of high-quality programs and to support over 450 additional low-income 4-year-olds with high-quality pre-K. That early education matching grant will be released for a second and unfortunately this year at the end of October. So, if you know those of you that are connected to early learning programs that wish to apply for this grant opportunity, it'll come out at the end of the month and be available on our website. Second initiative and key initiative I want to give you guys an update on and let you know what we're learning through this is the Indiana Pre-K Pilot Grant. This was established in the 2013 legislative session, signed into law 2014, excuse me. This morning I forgot what year it was, so this is not surprising. Have I mentioned that we're a little busy lately? So this Pre-K Pilot Grant was established during the last legislative session and signed into law by Governor Pence, House Enrolled Act 1004. And what this does, it sets aside $10 million in FSSA reversions. So this is money that FSSA would typically, in our savings, give back to the state at the end of the year. And instead of doing that, we're going to make this investment in early education, knowing that the return on investment is great and the opportunity is great. In Indiana, last year, in kindergarten retention costs, we spent $17 million as a state in kindergarten retention costs. If we are able to prepare children better for school and just save the money that we're spending in kindergarten retention and reinvest it, would be a long way towards seeing that return on investments. And that doesn't include what we anticipate seeing in the reduction in special ed placement, remediation, and retention in the earlier grades. So we're really excited about this opportunity to use these funds in this way. This pilot program also requires a match, so we're in the process of raising the required matching funds. It is the desire of the state that this be a true public-private partnership. There are 5 counties that have been selected to participate in the pilot, and this includes Lake, Allen, Marion, Jackson, and Vanderburgh counties. Those will be our 5 pilot counties. They were selected based on a demonstrated readiness to implement the pilot program, including both capacity of eligible providers as well as need of families and the ability to raise the matching funds. And they also needed to be geographically diverse and include a rural county, so that we're going to have a longitudinal study, and we want to make sure that we've selected a sample size that is sufficient and representative. So within these 5 pilot counties, the funding will be allocated and families will be able to apply for a grant. A family that is eligible must be below 127% of the federal poverty level, and their child must be 4 years old, and they must be a resident of the state of Indiana. But they will apply for a pre-K grant and then be able to use that grant at their choice of early education providers. Indiana's pre-K pilot is designed to be a mixed delivery system, which I think is critically important. We have the ability of learning from the states that have gone before us in their pre-K implementation and learn that a mixed delivery system has many advantages. And when I say mixed delivery system, what I mean is that there's lots of different early learning programs that can participate as an eligible program. Public schools and community-based providers, those licensed centers and registered ministries and licensed homes, must be a level 3 or 4 on paths to quality. Again, that quality assurance, because if we want to see the return on investment, we need to ensure that the programs are offering high-quality early learning opportunities. So they can take that grant to a public, a private school, a community-based program, hence the term mixed delivery system. The advantages of this are that it really helps to first raise the bar of quality for all children, so not just those 4-year-olds who are receiving a grant, but all children that are attending these early learning preschool programs, and gives families a wide range of choices so that we are supporting working families and as well as others, so that you have the choice of full day, full year services or just part day academic year. So it really is up to a family. What we're learning in these 5 pilot counties, and I'm working very closely with each of the counties to make sure that it is a locally driven initiative, is that there's a great need for capacity building those high quality programs that can and will have the high quality care to show the return on investment. There's just a lot of need, and you've heard it from Nancy. There are many, many ways for you to get involved. Before I say that, let me just say there will be a longitudinal study as part of the pre-K pilot. It'll look at children enrolled in the pilot, both during that pre-K year, pre and post, to measure growth over time, also kindergarten entry when compared to a control group. And then they'll follow both the sample and the control group all the way up to 3rd grade. So we recently released the RFP for this work, and the responses were due back at the end of last week, and so we should be awarding that grant opportunity to one of our evaluators in the very near future. So what can you do? Paths to Quality providers, and Paths to Quality has been validated and studied extensively by Purdue University. When asked why providers participate in a voluntary system, it is not the incentives or the awards that they mention number one. It's the recognition of the importance of the work that they are doing. Early childhood, I know being committed to the cause and preaching probably to the choir, has not always been recognized for as important as it is. So these programs say, I enrolled because I want to be recognized as a high quality learning program. So recognize those folks in your community if you can support them. It is not a money-making business, right? So especially to offer high-quality care with low staff-to-child ratios and high-quality experiences. So supporting those providers at the local level and sharing the messaging, as you've heard from our other speakers. And I think that probably brings me to time. Is that true? Yes. Okay, so I am out of time.
We do have a couple. Please, Melanie. We do have a few minutes if anyone has any questions about how Indiana is funding early childhood education. Any questions for Melanie today? I think we're talking about the immigrant population and if that affects your programs.
We're very sensitive to the immigrant population across the state, and it's not just our Hispanic or Latina families, but also Burmese families. And so we do have training, technical assistance, and supports available to make sure that we're meeting children regardless of where they're coming from, at where they are, and meeting their needs. So we have an Hispanic outreach program and an English language learner program to help make sure that those children are prepared for school as well.
Any other questions for Melanie? Melanie, I think people would be surprised, in this room I think they would be surprised at some of the challenges that you face in advocating for early childhood education, not just in Indiana, but across the country. Is it a challenge to advocate for this cause?
There are challenges, but there's nothing more rewarding either. So letting folks, I think as we know better, we do better. And as we learn more and more about brain research and the importance of these early years and those windows of opportunity that Nancy spoke about, where the return on investment becomes so clear, it becomes much less so.
All right. Melanie, thank you for all you do for Indiana's
thanks,
children.
everyone.
Please give Melanie a round of applause. Time to shift gears a little bit here. We are going to bring up our next featured speakers who will share the stage to talk about probably the most serious element of early childhood development. Very, very serious stuff. We're talking about play. We are very serious about playtime here. We want to welcome Ingrid Knix. She joins us from the Knix Inclusive Design. Now, she is an occupational therapist who has created for more than a decade, helping communities create and run amazing places where all of our children can play together. Now, Ingrid was a senior consultant on the U.S. National Advisory Team for the Center of Creative Play in Pittsburgh, and also worked as a therapy director for Hattie Lartham in Manoa, Ohio, before opening her own consulting firm focusing on creating and developing great play spaces in communities and presenting at local and state national conferences about play, sensory integration, and universal design. Also with us today is Marcia Thauwald. Now, Marcia Thauwald has been in education since 1978. She has been an elementary teacher, an elementary principal, a district-level curriculum director, assistant superintendent, and education professor at Baylor. She now spends her time as an education consultant. Now, Marcia has had the opportunity to present in conferences and reading summits at the state and national level, as well as many schools, churches, civic, and corporate organizations. She's published an article about implementing a wellness program in school districts for staff and students in the Texas Association of Journal Administrators, the Insight Journal, winter issue 2008, called Whatever It Takes, One Step at a Time. And oh, by the way, she is currently right now writing her first children's book. We wish her luck on that. Marcia is a member of the Association of Supervision and Curriculum Development, Texas Elementary Principal and Supervisors Association, and the Texas Retired Teachers Association, TRTA. Now, today, she represents Kiwanis' partner, Scholastic Books, and she's going to talk about the importance of reading to and with children in their first 2,000 days of life. So, to begin our discussion on brain development, is child's play. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what you do and how your work applies to early childhood development. Now, Ingrid, let's go ahead and start with you. Explain the importance of play.
Okay, so for me, the importance of play, we've heard all day long about how neurons are wiring together and firing together and really creating the skills that children need for life and to be successful in life. So for me, that happens when children play, especially in those first early years. And if you really look at the United States, which one of us is setting you off? Oh, okay. In the United States, we're actually in a play crisis for all children. And so there's a wonderful organization if you're interested about play and where play is going, and especially unstructured self-directed play, where a child is just given that opportunity to explore their world and engage in things that are around them. There's a wonderful organization called the U.S. Play Coalition. which is free membership. They operate out of Clemson University, and it's really spearheaded by some really keynote individuals in the world of play and play research. So Dr. Stuart Brown, Dr. Joe Frost, who are all kind of big names in the world of play. But really, when we look at the skills that you need as adults to be successful adults in the world and the world as it's evolving, I really feel it starts with play. It kind of goes back to everything I ever needed to know I learned in kindergarten. But I think it happens even before then. And with my particular role as a consultant with Landscape Structures, which is a partner with Kiwanis, I really focus on that importance of play specifically for children with disabilities and how we need to make sure that they have that access to play as part of their development.
So again, Ingrid is here to talk about play. Marcia is here to talk about reading, and that is probably the most basic parenting skill that we ever learned. But Marcia, talk to us about that and about what we've learned about reading and how important it is for our children.
Okay, I'm turning it on and off because I thought I was the one that was humming. Reading to our children at a very early age, from birth on, is important for two reasons. One of those is that we do know from the American Association of Pediatrics that reading aloud to your child is a significant aid in our child development and building those dendrites and making those pathways in the brain. The second reason, and probably the most important to me in my educational career, is the emotional bond that reading aloud provides for the caregiver and the child. As a matter of fact, my daughter is a licensed professional counselor, and in her master's program, they had a class where the professor has advocated that if we spend more time with that interaction between the child and the adult, we would see less of those school shootings that we have seen, because that emotional bond would be developed at a very early point in life. So both of those reasons, of course, are very important for why we need to get out there and share that reading aloud is one of the most important things we can do for our kids.
So let's break it down to its most elemental parts, Marcia. How much time should parents be spending reading to their kids?
We should be spending a minimum of 20 minutes a day, every day, reading to our kids. And we can find that time. We say we run out of time, but it's what we consider important, what's a priority. When we want to exercise, we find time to make that exercise happen. We need to make that reading time happen, 20 minutes a day. Most recently, Scholastic has put together a project where they developed a DVD of studying families from across America, and they called it 20 for 20. And what they asked these families to do is to spend 20 days reading to their children for 20 minutes a day. And you can download that DVD on the scholastic.com website and see what has happened within that 20 days. The results were amazing at what happened with those children's academic increase in their early childhood education programs, as well as that bond with their family.
Ingrid, we want to send it back over to you. We've learned a lot about playgrounds over the years and about making them inclusive. What are the components of an inclusive playground, and what are the benefits of making these playgrounds inclusive?
Okay, so I'm going to throw a question back out to you. How many of you have heard of ADA, the American with Disabilities Act? Okay. How many of you have heard of universal design? Okay, good. This is a more educated group than I typically talk to, because usually I don't get any universal design hands. Plus, I got you to move around a little bit, because I think we all need to move around a little bit. For me, an inclusive playground is one where every child can play. So it's not just about physical access, which is really what ADA addresses. It's more about universal design, which is reaching beyond ADA. So it's looking at access physically, but also looking at a population that we've heard a lot about today, is those kids who have sensory issues. So those kids who are falling in the autism spectrum. Some of our children who have cognitive delays, intellectual disabilities, that through play are able to make connections with peers. The playground is a great place to work on social skills. So a lot of our kids who are really having a lot of social struggles. And oftentimes when you talk to a parent of a child with a disability, the first thing they'll say to you is I want my child to be part of the play experience. And that's what really happens on an inclusive playground, is that it really allows every child to shine. It shows their strengths and not their weaknesses. It shows their desire to play, that is something that is innate in every single child, regardless of what their medical diagnosis is. So how do we design it to allow them to have those experiences? Because the other piece that it shows, a lot of times people will say to me, oh, it's so great that you have that inclusive playground because those children with those medical diagnoses and disabilities can now play. But the flip side is that they're typically developing peers, get to see their strengths and see their desires. And how that translates into kind of the business world is that when they become adults and they see somebody roll into their office, or they see somebody who comes into their office using a cane or some type of assistive device, they're going to think about what's the ability this person can bring to this job, not what's their medical condition. And so that's really where inclusive play sets the stage at a very young age, that it allows every child to find that just right fit in play.
So then how is an inclusive playground different than a playground that meets the ADA standards, or is there a difference?
There is a difference, because I think you're looking at not just physical access, but you're looking at sensory access. So for those kids who get very overwhelmed, who are on the spectrum, where are those quiet places where they can kind of step away but still watch the action and choose to re-engage in the play and activity? Or maybe it's creating little nooks where maybe 2 or 3 children can play together, which allows that child who's really weaker on the social skill level to begin to work on those skills in a way without feeling overwhelmed. It's also a playground that looks at multi-generational. So, you know, you're looking at the wounded warrior, who maybe I have typical kids. What better place to engage with my children? Or I'm looking at a grandparent. 60% of grandparents in this country provide at least 24 hours of childcare. So I'm looking at a grandparent being able to engage with their children and have that multi-generational experience. So it's finding those just right challenges, and that's a piece that I've been working with Landscape Structures now for over 5 years on really what does inclusion look like, and how do we push that envelope of creating a space that supports a whole community in its growth and engagement with each other.
Marcia, a question for you. When we talk about reading, we're talking about an educational process, not only for the kids, but oftentimes for the parents themselves. What are the top reasons that you give to parents and other caregivers about why reading is important to kids at such a young age?
Well, as I previously said, the 2 most important reasons, and I'll go ahead and say them again because I think it's important to say them, that it is a significant aid in brain development, and as well as providing that emotional bond. But we've all been hearing about 21st century skills, and that's what we want our children to be learning. And what better way to talk about vocabulary, communication, collaboration than reading aloud to our children and talking about the comprehension from that book, and let them tell you what they're thinking as they're going through reading that book. As a matter of fact, I want to share a really cute story. I had some kindergarten teachers that were doing a unit on love. And so the children were to draw a picture at their desk of what depicted love, what's love. And I walked around to look at their pictures when I was going in to see what was going on in the classrooms. And this little girl named Amy had drawn a picture of a man, and he was sitting beside his little girl reading a book. And I said, "Tell me about your picture." And she said, "Well, this is my daddy, and he reads to me every night, and that to me is love." And I said, "Wow, that is a great way to describe love." And she goes, "And you know what else? You know what true love is?" And I went, "No, don't. No, tell me." "It means you don't skip any pages." So, don't skip any pages.
It just shows the impact that we can make on our kids. And one more question for you, Marcia.
Okay.
I mean, one of the themes that we've heard throughout this whole conference is the investment that we make in our kids right now and the impact that it makes in their later lives. How can reading to a child for, say, 20 minutes a day affect them in their later lives and their later education?
Well, I think we've seen that all over this morning, this afternoon with all of our statistics. But we do have research that backs up that if we do spend that 20 minutes minimum a day, our children are more likely to be in that 90th percentile of their national norm reference testing. And beyond that, they become successful adults who are able to communicate and have the vocabulary. You saw the span of the vocabulary from the poverty-stricken child to the affluent. I thoroughly believe that if we read out loud to our children and teach them to be readers to their children, that we're going to close that gap. And we're going to be able to have those same children being able to talk the same way and having the same amount of vocabulary words from here to here, where it'll be here.
Ingrid, a question for you. I mean, I'm sure a lot of the questions that you get as soon as you start talking about playgrounds and inclusive playgrounds focus on the cost. Are these playgrounds expensive? Can they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes and price points, frankly?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the pieces that when we look at that community process of what does this community want, I have a lot of people who will say to me, just give me a checklist. Give me a checklist, and as long as I check these things off, I've got my inclusive playground. But inclusion is defined by your community. One of the pieces that I talk to communities about is, and we've heard all kinds of socioeconomic discussion here, but how many of you know your ability demographics for your community? What are the diagnoses that are in your regions? Do you have Paralympians who train in your neighborhood? Do you have opportunities where you can create a destination playground and really pull in a huge collaborative experience to create that larger playground, which may reach the multi-million-dollar point? And some communities choose to do that. They tend to be very collaborative because there's a huge cost point. But there's a whole economic impact that comes with that. So I'll give you an example. Wilmington, North Carolina, not necessarily a huge place, decided several years ago to put in a baseball complex because they wanted to bring in some regional tournament play and things like that. And they chose as part of that to put in a Miracle League field. And as part of that Miracle League field, they also chose to put in an inclusive playground. So this was a community that really wasn't on the map from an inclusive standpoint. But in the process of making this decision, so the land was county land, it was supported by city funding, but it was also supported by pretty much every business, and I don't know about the Kiwanis involvement or not, because I'm kind of new to this whole Kiwanis thing, but huge community engagement. Some of the statistics when you look at individuals with disabilities from a organization and city standpoint that you need to know is that we're extremely faithful to something that works. So now Wilmington has become kind of a hot spot for inclusive play. And they chose to do the largest miracle field they could do. So they could do Wounded Warrior, they could do softball, adaptive softball, and they could also do the Miracle League program for the children to experience. So now they've become a region that before was never on the accessibility, hey, let's go to Wilmington and hang out. But now people are coming because that piece was done. But the reality is you can have a pocket park in your neighborhood that has inclusive elements. It doesn't have to have everything that high-end playground will have, but it's also about paying attention to who's in your neighborhood, and maybe, this is an area that has maybe a higher level of autism. Maybe we're going to look at a sensory garden and sensory components and maybe some vestibular pieces here. Maybe over here we've got a special needs school that does a lot of work with children with mobility impairments, or we've got a Paralympic training community recreation space. How do we strategically throughout our region put in those elements that our broader community has access to that when we look at the whole picture? So Washington, D.C. is doing that with their parks. They're overhauling all 80 parks. And the other piece is it then becomes also unique to that part of the community. So it can be as big as you want it, but it can also be really small. And I think we see that especially in schools. Schools don't have huge footprints for big playgrounds. You have really kind of limited size, but it's about strategically thinking. And also we're beginning to do research with the Star Center in Denver, which is a sensory processing disorder foundation, actually looking at how those children are interacting with the equipment. So that if you have a really limited space, we're going to be able to say, you know what, if you've got a lot of kids with this type of diagnosis, you may want to look at these 3 or 4 elements, because the research coming out of the Sensory Processing Foundation is showing that these type of skills are coming out of these type of elements. So that's very early research. It's probably going to be 3 or 4 years before we get that into publication, but we're literally doing behavior coding along that.
It's sort of a dichotomy that something as elemental as play could be intimidating to many organizers, but I think that it can be. So what groups are out there that can encourage communities to build inclusive playgrounds that you're talking about?
I think when you look at your community assets, we've heard of March of Dimes is a collaborator that you guys have done work with. That's a group. It's finding who are those people who work with those individuals with different diagnoses. And don't just limit it to childhood, because you may have a strong Alzheimer's group that can also have some input into the design of that playground if you're looking at multi-generational. But it's really, a lot of times, I'm an occupational therapist, so I'll say go find your community-based OTs, because they're doing the early intervention. They'll give you the sense of, what are the needs in your community so that you can kind of design for those needs. A lot of your park and rec folks who are doing that programming piece. So there's really kind of a mix of designers to therapeutic support to pediatricians to school-based. And it's making sure you have kind of all those people at the table and say, what do we need to really meet our need? And then it's, then you've got a variety of manufacturers. And so then it's looking at who's going to meet that need and who really gets the depth of what your community needs to make it work.
We're going to open it up to questions to Ingrid about play and to Marcia about reading in just a minute. So go ahead and formulate whatever questions you might have. But Marcia, I do have to ask you one more question before we do open it up. And as a father of 3 kids with a wife who has a very vibrant career as well, for many parents it's always a matter of time, and time seems to run out before you can get to something as important as reading. So what do you tell parents who say, man, it's just hard sometimes to find the time in a busy day to sit down and do something as important as reading?
Well, again, with all the research that we do have out that everyone's talked about today, we know what it does. And so when you actually sit down and prioritize your day as to what's most important to you as a parent for you and your child, reading at least 20 minutes a day has got to be at the top of that list. I do want to say we know that one reason that our parents don't read is they really don't know how to read to their children. Scholastic Book Fairs has published, so I have to put a plug in for this because I helped with this. It is no cost. It is on the website. There's the PowerPoint, there's all the resources that go with it. This is a kit that we give to schools that tells them how they can have programs to show their parents how to read to their kids. It's divided into 3 components. I read to you, we read together, and you read to me. And it's one way of the new mantra that they've got out from Scholastic Inc. in New York. It's called Open a World of Possible. And what better title to go with the people that we've talked about in this room today, from the Kiwanis group to all of the experts, on being those unexpected messengers to open that world of possible.
Okay, I did want to open it up to questions right now because I don't want to dominate our discussion. Does anybody have any questions about playgrounds and about play for Ingrid or about reading for Marcia? Sir? Anyone? All right. I'm sorry, sir, go ahead.
Directed play, trying to give.
The question was about whether or not how much of the play should be directed play and how much should be
self-directed.
More self-motivated.
For me, I really feel it really should be self-motivated unless you're doing it as part of like a program element. But so let's say it's a park and rec who has a program element, but even as part of that, there should be an element of self-choice. And I think as we watch children play, so like when children come to a new playground they've never been on, and especially if it has equipment that's kind of different, initially they're just doing a lot of kind of motor play of how do I get over this, how do I move through this thing, and really the goal is eventually to actually get them kind of past the core motor pieces into facilitating pretend play. Now I've figured out how to climb this thing. I can see how high I can go. I can see how far I can swing. Now it's about connecting with other children who are here and taking it into that world of pretend play. So now I'm the captain of the ship and we're going to Mars. And I think one of the pieces that I love about the inclusive playgrounds that have the elements is that it often allows the child or the user who uses wheeled mobility to take a lead. And so there's times where I've been on a playground where the kids will just say, we're on this thing that moves, I can power it, we're going to go to the planets. And they make me make it move because I can move it in my wheelchair. And then they go off and they go to Jupiter, and then they literally come back and get me because the ship can't go without the engine. I become the engine because I can make it move. But for me, it's really much more, especially in the younger ages, the self-directed, because it becomes about where is that child developmentally as to what type of play they do. And I saw that when I worked at the Center for Creative Play, because we had the art, we had the gross motor area, we had the street of pretend play. And I would watch these kids who would come every day with their nannies or their parents. And today it was all about the art room, because that's developmentally where they were. And then, tomorrow, it's like the art room doesn't even exist and they're all about music. And so it's allowing kind of that, I think, that brain development and that fascination of, oh my gosh, what's this new thing? And especially kind of the birth to twos where they see something they've never experienced before. And it's like a little science experiment. And I don't know who said the quote that, play for children is really very scientific, but it is. And you see them drop it and they watch for the reaction, and then they throw it and they watch for the reaction, and all that stuff's being processed and all those neurons are connecting, and then they get efficient with it. Okay, now I want it to do this. So now they're starting to hone that skill. But that doesn't come through my direction. That comes by just letting them be in that environment and get deep into play, where the rest of the world ceases to exist. We used to actually design bathrooms really close to the play floor, because if kids got really deep into play, they missed that signal about going to the bathroom. Seriously. And then the other thing is, we got to get back to it. Having the bathrooms down around the corner and two lefts and then a right, that doesn't work for 4-year-olds or 2-year-olds. It's got to be right here.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
The question was about setting up play areas in a confined space, basically, right, is what I think you're talking about.
So we also had bins that kids could get into. I ran a program called Sensory Adventure Camp. So we had an area to explore playing with food. So orally tasting different textures. So for example, in the fall, we'd let them try different types of apples, and just the textures and the tastes, because oftentimes I think from a sensory standpoint we forget taste as part of that. There was always an art activity, a music activity. There were always books. There was always a little library activity. And I had to laugh because we had a little boy with autism who his favorite book was, I'm going to forget the name of it now, but we actually had to hide it, because if he found that book, nothing else existed. And so he would come in and check the library, and if the book wasn't there, then he'd engage. We had gross motor, so that ability to use just little trikes or movement activities, pretend play, and then fine motor play was the other one that we did. And sometimes that was combined with the art, and sometimes that was, more than fine motor, like textural, tactile play, where they could get in a pool of rice or beans or packing peanuts or yarn, so they had that full body tactile experience.
I think there was a question in the back. Ma'am. Well, there was, the question is about how do you address some parental concerns, I guess, about safety, quite frankly. in some of the playground settings?
Well, it's interesting for me because my background isn't in the playground industry. It's as an occupational therapist. So and actually a lot of my work is with children's museums, but we see this with children's museums too, is kind of this whole bubble wrapping and actually with children with disabilities is even more so. We're even hyper protective of them. So kind of that dignity of risk for every child. One piece that I've really learned is that the playground industry, out of all the industries I work with, is probably one of most hyper-regulated industries that you can think of. There are 4 regulating bodies that go into all this hyper protection, and the industry is kind of starting to push back on that. And I know just from my work with landscape structures, because I work on the design end of how do we come up with new designs that meet all those regulations, but that allow risk to happen. And one of the reasons why playground equipment is so expensive is that you're paying basically for the liability insurance that manufacturer covers on every single one of their products. So it's, unfortunately in the States, it's those regulators who are really taking the risk out of play. But you know, I've done presentations, let's say we did a presentation to the designers for the New York City parks. So that's 28,000 parks throughout New York City. And I do a lot of talking about the importance of sensory play as part of that kids need to move. We're driven to move at a young age. That's part of our development. And when we take that off our playgrounds, kids are going to find it somewhere else. So you might as well have the equipment that's been tested and proven to be safe, as opposed to taking all that stuff away, and the kid's going to climb the tree, they're going to climb the rock, they're going to fall off of it, they're going to break something, and that's part of risk. And really kind of the response I got from the designers was, thank you for giving us another reason to talk to our legislators about why kids need movement, why we need to have movement on a playground. They were literally being told at that point in New York City that anything that moved had to come off the playground for liability. And the designers were pushing back saying, you know, our kids we need to move to understand how our body moves through space. And kids need to have that at a very young age. I mean, gravity is there. It's not going away. You know, I need to know how to fall and handle my body as it falls and as it moves and experience that and play with kind of what that feels like to fall forward and backwards. And the industry provides kind of the safety mechanism. I don't know if you're familiar with a work by John Ricker. He's I think child psychologist out of Oxford, and he wrote an article that's one of my favorites called "Dirt is Good." And the whole premise of the article is that the world is a dangerous place, and if we don't play in it and get to understand the risks that are there, we're doing ourselves a disservice. And in the article, he talks about the 4 protective mechanisms that are built into play. So if you want a copy of it, I'll make sure that Pam gets it. But basically, you know, the first premise is that children don't play when they're terrified or when they're sick or when they're learning something new. And how many of you are parents and you can tell your kid's sick because they're not playing anymore? I mean, it's one of the. I mean, I don't have kids, but I've babysat enough kids that the moment this kid is just not playing the way I know them to, I'm going like, "Are you sick? Are you not feeling well?" But if a child is frightened, I mean, I've had that experience where I've kind of gone into a play experience where a kid's really been deep in play and I've kind of introduced myself into it, and you can see the play just disappear because I was new and I was a stranger, and that kid's like, whoa. And also when a child's learning a new skill, if I'm learning to ride a bike, it's all about the motor and balance that's going into riding a bike. It's not play yet. It becomes play once I've mastered the motor component. Then it becomes my motorcycle or my spaceship, or now we're going to, you know, be Evel Knievel or whoever we're going to be. You know, so I mean, I'm not going to go into all 4 because I could talk about them forever, but I'll make sure that Pam gets them. But it's a wonderful article because it really talks about how playing in our world helps us understand how far we can push ourselves, and that it continues into adults. As adults, if we don't continue to play, we actually disconnect from our world, and we're not able to assess risk appropriately, and then we put ourselves in situations of danger.
We can protect our kids to their detriment at some point.
Exactly.
Any more questions? Anyone? All right. I'd like to give both of you the opportunity just to sum up and make sure that we understood the message that you wanted to bring today. Marcia, I'll start with you. What message about reading can you leave us with?
Read 20 minutes a day, every day, and remember what true love is.
I feel a T-shirt coming on. I just a bumper sticker or something. Ingrid, some final thoughts?
I think for me, it's that take yourself back to your early childhood play experiences. Usually when I do a workshop, I start there. And what I've noticed is as I do that workshop with younger and younger generations, they don't have the vivid play memories that we had. So if you have kids and grandkids, make sure you give them the chance to develop those memories. And then the second part of my message would be, when you work on projects, think about that inclusive element. Not that you need to be the one who's bringing that in, bring in that expert, somebody like me, they're in your communities, but 20% of our population has some type of disability. I mean, there are people in your neighborhood, and we need to really make sure that that piece is there. So regardless of what kind of project you're touching, think about how do we support that individual who engages in reading differently because they have a visual impairment or some type of other impairment. How do we help them play? How do we help them in the workplace? Because it's a population any of us can enter at any point. As a friend of mine says, we're all temporarily able-bodied. I'm actually bimobile, so I could park this and walk away. Those of us who had dinner last night, I was not wheeling, I was walking. So just realize that these are individuals in our neighborhood that we can all advocate for. So thank you.
It's obviously so inspiring to see people like Marcia and people like Ingrid who have such a passion for our kids in two very different but very important ways. So we thank them both for their time and for spending it with us. Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you, Marcia. Earlier today, we heard from Kiwanis International President Gunter Gasser. Now, for our closing remarks today, we would like to welcome Kiwanis's next president. He is Dr. John Button. Now, tomorrow marks the beginning of Kiwanis International's new year, when Dr. Button will assume the role of president. This is going to be a milestone year as Kiwanis celebrates its 100th anniversary. I think that's worth a round of applause. Dr. Button has also traveled far to join us today. He joins us from Ontario, Canada, where he is retired as a longtime physician. Please join me now in making Dr. John Button welcome.
Thank you. And thank you, Bob, for guiding us through these important topics today. If I could add on to Marcia's story about love. A number of years ago, Kiwanis International surveyed a bunch of inner-city Indianapolis children about what Kiwanis was about. And to most of them, Kiwanis was about swimming pools and playgrounds and reading programs and so on. But to 9-year-old Jennifer, Kiwanis was about teaching children what love feels like. Yeah. There's nothing more important in this world than our children. Our children here in Indianapolis, our children in my hometown of Ridgetown, Ontario, our children in New York City, Los Angeles, Buenos Aires, Paris, Tokyo, and indeed our children in the tiniest villages in the most remote corners of the world. We must work together in our individual communities as well as in this collective community that we call the planet Earth to make sure today's children and tomorrow's children have the resources and the support they need to survive and thrive. Their futures are depending on us, and all of them, our futures, are depending on them. This year, Kiwanis International celebrates 100 years of serving the children of the world. We are proud of the work we're doing on behalf of children through our club's many service projects in towns and cities on nearly every continent. And we are proud to be working steadily toward a major global health initiative that we call the Eliminate Project. I want to take a moment to tell you about this initiative, because as we talk today about brain development, education, and nurturing children, the Eliminate Project is an even more basic and vital way we are supporting children. It's a life and death issue. Through the Eliminate Project, and with our partners at UNICEF, Kiwanis International has pledged to eliminate from the world a deadly disease called maternal neonatal tetanus. No baby is born to die. No woman should lose her life because she has given life. But that is the reality of maternal neonatal tetanus. This is a horrific disease that kills a newborn child every 9 minutes, that robs a young family of its mother every 20 minutes. It is an excruciatingly painful death in which the infant's senses are so painfully heightened, a mother cannot provide the human touch of soothing comfort. All she can do is watch and wait. Wait for her baby to die. Can you even imagine? But there's hope. Maternal and neonatal tetanus can be prevented through immunization of women of childbearing age for the cost of $1.80. Kiwanis began the Eliminate Project to raise the funds it would take to provide immunizations in the 39 nations in which maternal neonatal tetanus was still prevalent. Today, we have raised the funds and deployed immunizations to take 15 nations off that list of 39. Our goal is to complete our fundraising by our centennial celebration that will happen here in Indianapolis in June 2015 as our anniversary gift to the world. There's a table in the lobby with more information about our Eliminate Project and how you can help us. And I hope that you will take materials with you and consider joining our work. This is just another way we can rally together. You've heard today from experts about what children need, what they need from us as community leaders who have the interest and ability to collaborate and provide for them. Together, we have the ability to influence policy, to raise funds for children's well-being programs, to support teachers, caregivers, medical professionals, and others who touch and teach our children directly, to fill in the gaps with our time as volunteers around children's needs. It starts with all of us in this room. We came together today because we care about children, and we know we can do more to help them thrive in the most critical first hours, days, and years of life. But this is just the beginning. I would challenge each one of you today to share what you learned with others, to pass along the link to today's recorded session. And that link is www.kiwanis.org/children's conference. www.kiwanis.org/children's conference. And to bring together those who with you can collaborate to make a difference. These are our children. They are our future. On behalf of Kiwanis International, thank you all for joining with us today for these important discussions. Enjoy the rest of your day.